Welcome to a Pulp Event podcast, brought to you by the Pulp Net, your link to the online world of the pulp magazines for over 25 years. Learn more about the pulp magazines through articles, blogs, bibliographies, links, over 100 episodes of this podcast, and much more at thepulp.net. In this Pulp Event podcast, authors Christopher Paul Carey and Wynne Scott Eckert explore two of Philip José Farmer's novels, Doc Savage: His Apocalyptic Life, and Escape from Loki, and Farmer's contributions to Doc Savage's history and mythology. The panel was part of FarmerCon 18, which was held in conjunction with PulpFest, and was part of a celebration of 90 years of the great pulp heroes. This podcast was recorded on August 4th at PulpFest 2023 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
I'm Wynne Eckert. This is Chris Carey. I'm one of the three folks who helps run the Small Press Media House, where we publish a lot of Farmer's works and try to do a few other science fictional works as well. And on behalf of Media House and FarmerCon, which are two separate entities but have a lot of overlap because it's all the same guys, I just want to thank the PulpFest committee and thank everyone for showing up today. This is actually a huge audience for 2 o'clock. So really happy to see everyone here, and thank you. And Chris, do you want to introduce yourself, and then I'll talk about what we're talking about today?
Sure. Before I was director of publishing at Eckert Incorporated, I was an author and a huge Philip José Farmer fan, and I was also an editor, and I did a lot of work with Phil's stuff. I put out 3 collections in addition to co-editing a Wold Newton anthology with Wynne here. That's pretty much it.
All right.
Yeah.
So what Chris is leaving out is that he's he's actually an expert on Philip José Farmer's authorized Doc Savage novel, Escape from Loki, which was the first, new book to come out, and kind of set the stage for then all of the Will Murray books, the ones that followed in the 90s, and then when Will started publishing them again about 10 years after that. And it might sort of sound strange to say that Chris is an expert in this book, but if you've read it or just read it once, I encourage you after Chris's talk today to maybe give it a second look or a closer look. He's written several very studious but enjoyable to read articles, really delving into a lot of the subtext in this book and a lot of things that Farmer layered in that you might not have caught the first time around. So that's one aspect of what we're going to talk today, and Chris is going to cover that. And then after that, I'm going to talk about Farmer's mock biography, Doc Savage: His Apocalyptic Life. And I know a lot of you are probably familiar with that. I'm going to take a tack of how it helped fandom, right, and how it drove fandom. So instead of talking about necessarily the details of the specific content, I want to talk about it in terms of us and how it helped many of us come here and be here today. So with that, Chris, by the way, this can be conversational, like we're sitting in the lobby or the bar with a beer or something. So if someone wants to pop in, as long as it's not like a 5-minute digression, but a comment to kind of keep the conversation going, we would appreciate that. That's totally fine. So with that said, Chris, what grabbed you about Escape from Loki? What is so special about this book that may not have been self-evidently special on first reading?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the book came out of a kernel of an idea that Phil mentioned in Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life. So he said that in there, and he put it in the timeline, the chronology at the end of the book, about Doc Savage's adventure in World War I, where he met his aides.
Right.
So, like, we Doc Savage fans were like salivating to finally get that, and
Right.
Farmer fans too.
Right.
When this came out, and so when I first read the book, just sort of the preface. I had read Farmer around the same time I really got into Burroughs. A little bit after I started reading, I saw Tarzan Alive, and I started reading that. I hadn't finished the Tarzan series, so I read part of that. And I started reading Phil's works, and so I read his World of Tears and all that. And while I was reading them when I was younger, when I was a young teenager, I knew there was something that I was missing when I was reading them. It's like he's doing stuff behind the scenes in these. There's like some kind of machinery moving underneath the surface. And I could never really figure it out. I'd find out a little thing here, a little thing there. But this book, when I read this book, Escape from Loki, the first time I read it, and I'm like, okay, that was a great Doc Savage adventure. Mm-hmm. And I liked it so much. It's the only time I've ever done this. I think I immediately picked it up and started reading it again. And I ended up doing that 5 times in a row. And in one of those times, I can't remember, it might have been the second time, one thing just jumped out at me, and I had been like reading pretty heavy Doc Savage at the time period when I read this. I was making my way through like the whole Super Saga, all 181, 182, I guess, original Super Sagas, as Farmer called them.
Right.
And I just, one little thing stood out to me, and it was there's a character in here. So Doc Savage basically gets captured and sent to like a high security, super secret prison called Camp Loki in this book in World War I. And he, while he's there, there's a character who's named Baron von Hessel, who's the commandant of the camp, and then there's a woman there, the Countess Ediv Sapu Lily Bugov.
Lily Bugov
is her name, and she's this mysterious Russian woman. And when he describes her as having unusually long fingers.
Right.
And that just jumped right out at me. It wasn't. I don't think it was the first reading. I think it was the second reading. And I'm like, wait a minute. That's John Sunlight, Doc Savage's, arch nemesis from the 1930s, from Fortress of Solitude and The Devil Genghis, the original pulp stories.
And just a quick interjection comment. When Farmer writes something, he puts it in there. It's always on purpose. It always means something. We've found this from reading Farmer over and over again. And it could be the 10th reading, and then that's a clue.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. And that's what I was talking about when I was reading it when I was younger.
Yeah.
I could sense that there were things going on. I knew he was doing things, but I couldn't put it all together. I didn't necessarily even have the reading experience, the literature, exposure to literature that I needed to know to decipher what he was doing behind the scenes. But this jumped out at me because I was like heavily into Doc Savage at the time.
Yeah.
And then so I started looking at it, and I started looking at like the character of everything, all the different characters in the book. And I started examining the character Baron von Hessel. And he had a number of really strange things about him. He was super intelligent, very manipulative, scientific genius, basically. And there's this banquet scene in the book that was very, very reminiscent of the banquet scene in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with Professor Aronnax and Ned Land and all that. In fact, he does make a reference to 20,000 Leagues, an offhand reference. And that got me thinking about Phil's Wold-Newton family, because there are connections with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and the whole Wold-Newton family. And of course, he brought Doc Savage as a member of the Wold-Newton family.
Right.
So I'm just looking at these little pieces. I'm not necessarily going to explain everything here today that I kind of uncovered, but one thing about the Baron was he was smoking these giant Zeppelin-sized guitars, cigars. Sorry, not. He had also written a monograph that was on Treponema pallidum exposed to X-rays while suspended in diluted cannabis sativa. So what that translates to is the bacteria that causes syphilis exposed to X-rays soaked in marijuana. And it's like, okay, what's going on here? And I started wondering, like, okay, because he's smoking the cigars, I'm like, is there a connection there? You know, because of the marijuana reference, you know, and then cannabis sativa, there's something going, you know, it's a sexually transmitted disease, and it seems like the Baron is sort of like creating circumstances where Doc is going to be interested in the Countess,
right?
Basically, trying to get them together to have intercourse,
right?
Perhaps, you know. And the Baron is also, I'm going to spoil some stuff here, but it's an old book. But you know, he's searching for the secret of immortality,
right?
An immortality elixir, longevity elixir that he had at one time, and then he lost it because his family castle burned down. And so I'm like, okay, what if this is related to that somehow? Because it's never explained by Phil, and like Wynn said, he always seemed to mean something by that. And then I had also obviously read a ton of Farmer, and in the novel A Feast Unknown, which is the Doc Savage Tarzan sort of parody novel, which also has like a really great science fictional plot behind it, behind all the very over the top.
Yes.
Parody type stuff. There's a whole immortality thing. It's all about this secret society that possesses the secret to immortality, and there's only certain people of the society who get to use it, and all. And Doc Savage, and you know, his Doc Savage analog and his Tarzan analog are two of those agents. And when they get the immortality, they have to have a treatment every so many years. They have to come back to the caverns of the Nine and get this treatment that's going to give them the immortality. But it's never Doc Savage, or not, I should say Doc Caliban and Lord Grunneth, these analogs for Tarzan and Doc Savage. They don't really know how they're being administered the elixir. And what's curious is there are these torches burning, and it's made. You know, he really makes it clear that there's like smoke in these caverns. So I'm like, okay, there's smoke. The cigar. What if that's what's going on? What if the elixir is actually being, you know, like literally under their nose, being exposed to this? So there's a lot going on. So then
the ceremony that they go through then, where they have a certain painful organs removed, then maybe that's a distraction, right? Maybe that's not
a red
really,
herring.
right?
It's a red herring,
right? And it's part of a ritual, right?
Yeah.
To make them like think, you know, this is the ritual, but really it's this other thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's what they would do, right? Because they're trying to protect the secret, and they don't want everybody to know. They don't even want their agents to know.
Yeah.
So I delved into von Hessel's character because I'm like, there's something going on here with this guy. Turns out Hessel means one who comes from Hessel, which is a village in the East Riding of Yorkshire. Now, the East Riding of Yorkshire is where Wold Newton is. That's where the Wold Newton meteorite fell, where a certain group of people were exposed to the ionized radiation, and it created a mutation in the genes, and then you get this whole lineage of super people, right? You know, these heroic
ancestors of Tarzan and Doc Savage who were there. Yeah.
And so that's interesting. And then Hessel also means hazel, is an eye color. And I had noticed a weird discrepancy in the book, which is that von Hessel is described in one scene as having green eyes, and he's described in another as having blue eyes. So I thought, well, maybe the Hessel is pointing to the eye color discrepancy. And this is Phil like calling it out. So you need to figure out what this mystery is.
Right.
So in Farmer's The Other Log of Phileas Fogg, which is the secret history behind Around the World in 80 Days, you learn that there's actually 2 warring alien groups on Earth, and the descendants of, and they're human agents basically who are battling each other, and it's a secret war. So they have to do this war under the table, so to speak. And but one of the pieces of technology in this is an alien technology that allows for the change of eye color. So that's like, okay, I wonder if there's a connection there. So there's that. And then there's a scene in the book where Doc Savage goes to this Chateau du Moussard in the French countryside, and he finds this very strange, like, secret chamber where, like, kind of satanic rituals are going on. But on the altar, he finds and these are the words that Phil uses, a worm unknown to science is sitting on the altar, and it creeps him out. It's a really, really creepy scene. Unexplained in the novel, like nothing. But devotees of Arthur Conan Doyle will recognize that phrase, a worm unknown to science, from the story The Adventure of Thor Bridge, in which there are 3 stories that are 3 adventures of Sherlock Holmes that are mentioned just in passing by Watson.
Right, like the untold stories.
Untold stories. And one of them is, this adventure of a worm unknown to science. So that was definitely a reference there. Then it turns out that Phil Farmer wrote a story called The Adventure of the Soar Bridge, which is alluding to that, and in which he took those three unsolved, unwritten about. Were they unsolved? I think they were unsolved.
Yes.
Yeah, unsolved cases.
Yes.
And presents them. So and he used Raffles, the character Raffles,
and Holmes. Holmes and Raffles has a
he's chasing,
more of a cameo appearance, but it's,
to present these three mysteries. And in it, it turns out that there's so on the surface there's like a mystery involving a gemstone, but it turns out that these gems are actually chrysalises for these alien creatures that turn into, in a like chrysalis form, they turn into these worms. But when they grow up, basically, they become shape-shifting aliens that can like totally change form, and so it's like, okay, that's interesting,
right?
So, and then at the very end of the book, there's a very confusing scene where a character it's during the prison breakout and everything, and there are some high level prisoners. There's one named Duntreath, and he's playing the game of bridge with a couple other high level captives, and they suspect that there's this other guy, Murdstone, who's really the traitor in the camp. But it turns out Murdstone tells Doc in his dying breaths that it's actually Duntreath was the one, and it's a kind of this, he's dying, so you have all these ... and like you can only barely piece together what he's trying to say. But the game of bridge is descended from the game of whist. It's a modification of the game of whist, which was super popular in the 19th century. And that actually is a game, it features prominently in The Other Log of Phileas Fogg, that novel that I told you about. And in that book, the agents of the Capellians and the Eridanians, these 2 warring alien races, the human agents, they actually communicate amongst one another because they're trying to keep everything secret by means of whist. So the certain cards and plays of the game actually are a language, so they can actually transmit missions and things to each other and communicate intelligence to one another. And so I'm like, okay, Duntreath and these people, he's a traitor suddenly. They thought he was one of their allies. Is playing bridge when this fire breaks out and this chaos consumes the camp and all. And so I started to figure, okay, maybe there's a Capellian Eridanian thing going on here, and we're communicating by means of this bridge game. And that's kind of, it goes from there, basically. I didn't really say this before, but I believe that Phil meant for von Hessel to be the Baron Karl from Fortress of Solitude and the Devil. Wait, was he in both of those? He was in the first one, Fortress of Solitude. And he was sort of is the Playboy Prince. Was he? No, he wasn't the Playboy Prince. That was a different guy, right? That was a different guy. I'm getting mixed up, but
he was.
Anyway.
He was a baron.
He was a baron. Yeah, and he was paired up with John Sunlight.
Right.
So I started
but with the roles reversed. Yeah. Right. Almost at this point. Well, you haven't said who you think.
I haven't said who I think. I haven't said who I think that Lily Bugoff is.
Right. But Lily Bugoff was the Baron's companion that the Baron was trying to match up with young Clark. Just as a reminder. So are you gonna?
So I
wrote as well because we're pulling back the onions, right? Let's just do it.
So I wrote an article called "Loki in the Sunlight," in which I attempted to prove that Lily Bugoff actually was John Sunlight, that there had been a sex change somewhere down the line, and there are a number of details when you John Sunlight was the long fingers. John Sunlight was also known for only wearing one color, whether it was purple, whatever. And if you read the book, Lily Bugoff is always described as wearing one color in the book. So, in a nutshell, that's my theory there. So this was sort of a hidden sequel to the Fortress of Solitude and the Devil Genghis, basically,
or a hidden prequel.
Prequel, prequel to it, and but it was also a sequel to the other log of Phileas Fogg.
Yes.
So he had cloaked a science fiction novel in what seems to be, on the face of it, just a World War I novel about, that has some, it's got the elixir in it, which is a science fictional detail. But, and at the end of the book, Lily Bugoff gets in an accident and basically has her back broken or what have you.
Right.
So the question is, what happened from there, but
I
addressed that in my article as well. But
and who do you think Baron Karl was?
So Baron.
I'm sorry, Karl.
You just
Karl von Hessel.
Von Hessel, I believe, was the Baron Karl.
And anybody else? Was he anyone else?
Yes.
Okay.
So, so there were a lot of clues in there that. It's kind of like a la Highlander, where you've got a character who's living down through the centuries, changing identities. Yeah. So my article connects him with Wolf Larsen from Jack London's The Sea Wolf. It's been a long time since I wrote this article. You're more familiar with it than I am at this point. But
that's the big one.
That's the big one. And Wolf Larsen is a Wold Newton. Is in the Wold Newton.
So the interesting thing is that in the back matter of Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life, where Phil outlines the Wold Newton genealogy, the genealogy in his eyes, Wolf Larsen from Jack London's The Sea Wolf is the grandfather of Doc Savage. Right. Yeah, what you could see that if Chris is right, if von Hessel's prior identity was Wolf Larsen, then this is actually a matchup of Doc versus his evil grandfather, right? Yeah. There's some dots to be connected there, whether you buy it or not.
Yeah. But, and then even further, he may be Odin.
Yes, he may. he actually may literally be Odin.
Yeah. And a lot
or
of
the person who was the inspiration. for the myth of Odin.
And, there's a lot of crossover with his Doc Caliban and Lord Grunneth books that's more almost thematic.
Yes.
But you can make the connections and see. And so I came up, when I wrote like these kind of master articles back, I consider them like my best nonfiction creative mythography, I guess you would call it.
Yeah.
Work that I've ever done. I came up with the term the Farmerian monomyth, which is the idea that all of Farmer's works are linked, or a large portion of his works are linked, and that he's telling a meta story underneath. And so this was sort of the beginning of like cracking that code. And then, as I say at the beginning of my article, I say one can begin. It's like a Charles Fort quote. One can begin measuring a circle anywhere, basically. But Escape from Loki is a really good place to start cracking the code, because once you see that, it branches out into his World of Tears, Riverworld, all over the place. But he was a trickster character. Phil was a trickster, and he loved to layer stuff in. And like, I am 100% convinced that this was all intentional. Yeah. It branches out into Meteor House published recently Iron Castle.
Yes.
I'm not going to go deeply into it, but you know how I said the gemstone was sort of like the egg chrysalis form of these extraterrestrials. Well, there's a whole crystalline themed thing going in Iron Castle that Phil added to J.H. Rosny's original novel. He adds material on at the end that digs deeper into the whole crystal mythos that he was creating.
Yep.
So it's this huge, expansive thing. I know it sounds like the ravings of a madman when I'm up here talking about this. If you read my article, which is in a book called The Grandest Adventure that I wrote that collects all of my works on Farmer, I have that article in there, and I present it in a much more logical fashion, because frankly, I've been so busy with Burroughs for the past 5 years, it's like wiped my memory out.
Nah.
So...
definitely look for The Grandest Adventure on Amazon by Chris Carey. And you revised that. You made some minor revisions.
Yeah, this is
that's
the best version of the article to read.
That's the best version of the article. So Chris had mentioned that Odin kind of appears in several different continuities, if you will, of Phil's works. Odin is also, heavily. There's a character in the Secrets of the Nine series, which Chris had mentioned starts with the Feast Unknown, which is Lord Grunneth versus Doc Caliban, his analogs for Tarzan and Doc Savage. Starts in a Feast Unknown, continues in Lord of the Trees, which is focused on Grunneth, and then the Mad Goblin, which is focused on Doc Caliban. So he mentioned the Nine, this secret society of immortals who have the secret to immortality and control that secret very tightly. One of the members of the Nine, who is recently deceased in a Feast Unknown, is strongly implied to be Odin, right? Yep. And so that it just carries through. I had a theory. So after Chris presented his theory that Lily Bugoff actually was a younger version of John Sunlight, I took it in a slightly different direction, inspired absolutely by your research, just to be fair. But I came to a slightly different conclusion, or at least a different theory, was that when von Hessel was manipulating the sexual encounter between young Doc and Lily Bugoff, that the intended result was to have a child come from them.
And I did consider that, and I wrote to Phil and asked him point blank about it, and he would not answer.
He would never answer.
He said, "Let your theory stand on its own."
Right,
is what he said.
Yeah. And of course you considered it because it's sort of an obvious, right? Yeah. And so my theory was, despite some of what Dent said about Sunlight's age in Fortress of Solitude, and I acknowledge that, that Sunlight was actually, John Sunlight, Doc's greatest enemy, was actually his son from this sexual encounter. Whichever one you accept, or neither, that's completely fine. But the point is that these clues are here, and these are not just books They can absolutely be read just on their face, and then, they're just an adventure, and you put them aside, or you can come back and read them again and again and again and again, like we do, right? And they're puzzles to be solved, right? And maybe you'll never find the solution. Like you said, Phil would never say, number one. And number two, Phil's no longer with us, so we will never have the absolute answer. But I think it's even more fun to just go on the journey of trying to solve the puzzle and look for these clues, regardless of what the answer is. So I will say that Doc Caliban and Lord Grunneth, very late in his cycle, he presented at the 1983 World Fantasy. Is that right?
Yes.
World Fantasy, he presented an outline for a fourth book in the series, and then he actually read a projected chapter, which was then memorialized in the booklet. So it's been in print, it's been available. And in his recitation, he came out and said, this is an alternate universe, right? Now, that hadn't always necessarily been his stance. I think when he was first writing the books back in the 60s and the early 70s, I think in his head, and this is my theory, again, I think in his head he was actually thinking, he was writing literally about Tarzan and Doc Savage.
So does he actually come out and say it's an alternate universe?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That comes straight.
I'll take your word for it.
I don't think he uses those words, but he implies he says now these are alternate versions.
Right? The interesting thing is you look at the biographies and you look at what he actually writes. Mm-hmm. He says in Tarzan Alive that he is writing analogically.
Yes.
He said this is the first analogical biography. Like he was doing weird stuff,
right?
Basically, and so he was claiming that these people were real and that he had interviewed Tarzan and all that. And he liked to play with the line between fiction and reality. And
but he even did that in the introduction, the short introduction to the Mad Goblin, where he says, I have this manuscript from Doc Caliban. He requested that we present this in the third person because he doesn't like talking about himself in the first person.
Which is a trope that Edgar Rice Burroughs did, but also is in the Doc Savage novels. There's a particular Doc Savage novel, I can't remember which one it is.
I think it was you would know. The one where he says, all of these crazy stories that are being written about me. Yeah, there you go.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
So he doesn't say it's an alternate universe, but the chapter that he writes has Doc Caliban, and it has Doc Caliban having these debilitating visions, and it's of another version of himself. He knows that, right? And so it's very strongly implied that that's an alternate. He's actually seeing Doc Savage in these visions. So he's Doc Caliban in one dimension, and Doc Savage is in it.
That was a conversation you and I had several years back that I think was the kernel for what
absolutely
this book ended up being.
So that's so this book covers that topic. It expands on what he did, strongly implying that there were two very tightly connected but still parallel dimensions. And so the really interesting thing about fandom is that these factions, and these dividing lines occur in fandom, and then people have their theories. And Chris's theory is that Lily became John Sunlight, and my theory is that Lily and Doc were the parents of John Sunlight. But we're still best friends, right? We don't. We don't dig in about it. We take this stuff pretty seriously, but we also don't take it seriously in a way that affects things. But I see so much toxicity nowadays in fandom, where people divide into these different factions and dig in their heels and get really angry about stuff.
It's supposed to be fun.
It's supposed to be fun. And so this book is about two Docs in two universes with two continuities, but it's also about everything is true. in one version this is true, and in another dimension this is true, and in a third dimension this other, continuity or theory is true, and it's all okay, right? And I realized, I wasn't like writing this book or finishing Phil's work, I should say, intending that to be a theme, right? But that was when I ended it, that was like the resulting theme. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The two docs, they become one, right? It's all just like the monomyth, right? There might be different details, but it doesn't matter. What matters is the message. And the message was that it took two docs to come together to defeat the menace, which, in the book. Or it could have been 3 docs or 10 different docs, right? All coming into this uber doc. And I know this sounds really mystical, but I think we've been through so much in terms of fandom and fan reaction, and some negativity. And I just got to say, this is the biggest crowd I've ever seen for a FarmerCon panel, and I'm thrilled because it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be only Will Murray or only Phil Farmer or only Lester Den. Doc belongs to all of us in all of the varied interpretations. So, off my soapbox, but the reason that I got to that point of thinking that way was because of this book, Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life. And this was Phil's love letter to Doc Savage, just like Tarzan Alive was Phil's love letter to Tarzan. And, I imagine that there are a lot of people in this room that have read this book. Maybe there's some that haven't. That's great too. We have copies at the Meteor House table. But the point is not that every single detail that Phil put in the book, some of which he added out of whole cloth, out of his imagination, and other pieces which were more straight recitations of the original pulps, kind of merged in all together. In the end, it doesn't matter. In the age of the internet, we can look at every single thing he said here and look at some details and pick it apart and crap on it until the cows come home. But it doesn't matter, because in 1973, without the internet, without the benefit of computers, written by hand, right, transcribed, after reading all of the original pulps multiple times through and taking notes, he produced this book. And that's an amazing achievement, right? In an analog world, that he read 181 books over and over again and took notes and produced this book, which is why many of us are here today, okay? Because I think we're all about in the same general age group. I don't see a ton of young people in here. If there are some younger people in here, please, and you have any faint interest in Doc Savage or the pulps, read this book. This book was an inspiration to a whole generation of Doc Savage fans who didn't have anything else. You can go and search for anything on the internet today and get it like that. Back then, a lot of people didn't even know that Kenneth Robeson was a pseudonym and that Lester Dent was the primary writer and that there were some other writers. Did he get every single detail right when he was looking at the records and trying to figure out and parse out which of them wrote which one? No, he made some mistakes. BFD, right? He did his damn best, and it's why many of us are here today. This book got many of us into pulp fandom and into the backgrounds of the books. And I know that I'm being very passionate, but this book really, truly changed my life. And that's not a cliche. I was talking with Anthony about an hour ago. Hi, Anthony. And it was kind of like talking about Doctor Who and the fixed points in time and how you can change, time, the theories of time travel, and you can change someone's life, or other points don't matter, right? Like, well, I went left and got a glass of water when I could have gone right. doesn't matter, it doesn't change my life, right? But if you went back and took this book away from me when I was 8 years old, and I didn't have it, and I didn't have those other Doc Savage bantams that were given to me along with this book by a family friend when I was 8 years old, and I read them in the back of a Grand Prix Pontiac driving back from Washington, D.C. to Colorado in the back seat of my parents' car. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't be here today. I'd be a completely different person. And it's just so, that's what it means to me. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, was my fandom and why this book is important.
And I had a very similar experience. I don't think I would be working at, this is going to sound weird, but I don't think I'd be working at Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated if I had not read this book. Because this is the book that got me reading all the original Doc Savage novels, and then ultimately writing the article.
The one that you just talked about.
Yeah, that I sent to Phil, and then Phil wrote me a letter back, and that meant the world to me. Mm-hmm. I was in my early 20s, and it just set me on fire. And I just dug deeper and deeper and continued writing about Phil's works. And eventually that led to me editing his works. It led to me, writing the Song of Kwasin, But
in his ancient Opar cycle.
And if I hadn't done that and had gotten that experience and had the editing work behind me and stuff like that, in the novel on the horizon, I would not have gotten hired at Paizo Publishing, which was a really great RPG publisher. And if I didn't have that 10 years of working there, being senior editor, I would not have been able to get the job at ERB Inc.
Right.
And so that grew out of that. So it totally affects your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we, so this version of Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life came out in 2013 for the 40th anniversary of the publication of the book. And this version from Meteor House is an aggregate of all of the different prior printings. And that's why we call it sort of the definitive version. Now, to be fair, there were not a lot of major differences, except the first hardcover publication in 1973, Phil actually did some heavy revisions for the first paperback publication in 1975. Thereafter, the paperback publications actually do have a few minor differences. So there was a Playboy paperbacks 1981, and there was also a 1975 British paperback from Panther, I think. All of them have very slight differences. So I reconciled those, but reconciled them off of the 1975 and post 1975. So he revised some of his Wold Newton genealogical theories between 73 and 75. That's why we call it the definitive version. I wrote the introduction to this, and then we have great bonus articles in it from Will Murray, Chris, Art Sippo, John Small, Rick Lay, and Keith Howell. So for Doc's 50th, we talked with the estate and have put out this limited collector's edition of the book. So it's got leatherette binding with bronze foil stamping, and then we've got the Chrysler Building, Chuck, on the back. Right? That's a joke. That's an in-joke between us. We have copies at the table. A lot of them have been pre-ordered, so they're going fast, but we still have copies available. The interiors are the same from the 10-year-ago version, with the exception that we have new colored end papers on the interior, which we can show you at the table. These are obviously wrapped. And the limitation page, if you look at the book with the pyramid, then on the inside, the limitation page will have the artwork of Doc's head. If you buy the version with Doc's head, then the interior limitation page will have the Mayan pyramid. We have copies of both versions available.
One thing you didn't mention is there's you actually inserted material
That
wasn't in any edition prior
right.
to this.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
That's pretty important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have access to Phil's files. And in those files, we did find some material from Doc Savage, his Apocalyptic Life original manuscript, and handwritten graphic family trees, which had inexplicably not been included. We couldn't figure out why.
Does he mention, he wrote an article on writing this book.
He did.
Does he mention
He doesn't.
that?
No.
Okay.
And that's called Writing Doc's Biography. It's in here as well. And it's also in our free FarmerCon program, which you can pick up at the table. He doesn't mention that.
Okay.
So I editorially stitched in a couple of paragraphs that we had found in his files, and we revised the genealogy graphic to include a couple of additional Woolden family members.
One thing he does mention in that article is that he was a working writer when he wrote this book. He was living off his writing. And he took the time to do this, which he was, not paid what he would normally get. He was an award-winning science fiction writer. He had already won the Hugo for To Your Scatter Buddies Go, the first Riverroll book, and all. And so he was at the height of his career when he was writing this, and he had to write it on a deadline, to get it done and all. And he talks very frankly about that. He's like, well, I could have gone on and did this, but I had to. I had to write more books.
Right.
So,
and in particular, his version of the chronology, the fictional chronology of the adventures in the back, which he, comes right out in this other piece and says, it was. I'm not entirely happy with it. I know that there are flaws, right? But he did his best, and within the time limitations, and also not having. A computer where you can just edit and move things around very easily. So he acknowledged that, and a lot of fans I've read, over the course of the years, really criticized the book, and in particular Doc's biography, or Phil's chronology. And to that I just say, 1973, typewriter, right? I mean, how well would you do, right?
Yeah. I do want to mention one thing that I think is important that I think isn't really understood about Phil, and I think it's what causes a lot of the antagonism from certain factions about his work with other characters. But when he wrote A Feast Unknown, it's this very raw, over the top. I don't even know how to describe it. Book.
Hyper-violent, hypersexual.
Yeah, and
right.
so that really goes against the grain when you're thinking of Eckert Burroughs, who's very Victorian, and Lester Dent, who, the stand-up hero and all that. And so that, it just shocks people. It was meant to shock people.
Exactly.
But Phil had in his background, I just want to mention this very briefly, when he in the 1940s, he kind of fell in with a group of people coming back from World War II on the GI Bill, kind of bohemians and, and they had smuggled in copies of books that were banned, like Henry Miller books and things like that. And that just deeply imprinted him that they could ban a creative work, And I think he just from the beginning when he did The Lovers, he's breaking all the codes, breaking all the boundaries, And so that he just had that strain in him because he just vigorously believed that you should be able to write about anything, and he had such an imagination that it's shocking. A Feast Unknown is shocking, but if you get past that, there's an amazing storyline there. It's one of the best science fiction novels I've read.
Right.
But people don't take that into account, that he really had that streak in him of he needed to be able to express himself and not be filtered.
And yet it was not, those characters were not cast in a negative light for him. He loved those characters.
He thought it was funny.
Yeah.
He thought it was funny.
It was over the top satire.
He was not trying to dishonor those figures. It was the exact opposite.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what some people don't get with him.
Right.
So
looks like we have maybe 3 minutes for questions. But before we take questions, if there are any, I wanted to thank Ron Hill for being our videographer and recording this. And Ron also has a copy of 1975 edition of Apocalyptic Life, which he is handing out to Doc fans to ask to inscribe with their experiences or why they're fans of Doc.
Let me correct you.
Sure. Yeah.
Asking people that I interview for the documentary to sign this.
Okay. All right.
I'm sure everyone has seen this book before. This is the one that started.
So find Ron and talk to him about Doc. And thank you again for the video. We appreciate it. Okay. Any questions from? Yes.
I have a continuity question regarding your theory. John Sunlight appeared in 1938.
Yes.
And my recollection is he was not young.
Correct.
So I don't see how he could be the result of the tryst.
I understand, and if you remember, I did mention that there was the age issue, and in my longer write-up of my theory, I addressed that. Probably not in a satisfactory way, which is why we have, differences of opinion. I said, he was, pretending to be older, makeup, things like that. It was all part of the conspiracy.
Yeah. That was the key reason that I went with my theory, though.
Right. Yeah.
Can you be more specific? Your theory was that Lily had a sex change?
Yes.
Or was she non-binary from the beginning and then just masculine?
Well, it's hard to say, right?
Yeah. I didn't know which way you fell.
Yeah. Don't really know, but...
Lee?
Yeah.
In light of the timeline put forward by Robert Heinlein in All You Zombies, where the one character is both his father, his mother, and himself, is it possible that John Sunlight is both Doc's child and lover?
Sure. As I said, there are multiple realities and multiple possibilities because of those multiple realities. All right. Okay, I think we're... Chuck.
I just want to point out that because of Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life, is we all can write articles like that.
Yes.
And we can all put those sort of things out there and discuss them in whatever way we can. And I'd like to read that article where John is his son and his...
Right.
It's a short story by Robert Heinlein called All You Zombies.
Okay.
Well, that's the one you're going to write about.
Yeah.
Doc's lover and his son.
One more question.
Okay, so where do you, if one of us wants to write an article, where do we write it?
So that would be the Bronze Gazette. You can send it to submissions at bronzegazette.com, and thank you for the opportunity to do that plug.
Absolutely, and the plug is very, very well founded. Bronze Gazette is old school printed fanzine, 3 issues a year.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
And my original articles were first printed in the Bronze Gazette under Howard Wright. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thanks.
You've been listening to a Pulp Event podcast, brought to you by the Pulp Net, your link to the online world of the pulp magazines for over 25 years. Learn more about the pulp magazines through articles, blogs, bibliographies, links, over 100 episodes of this podcast, and much more at thepulp.net. Also, look for the Pulp Net on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you for listening, and keep reading the pulps. This Pulp Event podcast is copyright 2023 by William P. Lampkin. All rights reserved.